And today our topic is going to be on um, testing communications to kin with kinship caregivers. And with us today, we have Shelley Ronan from Bloomworks. We also have Renata Watson, from the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And then we have a kin caregiver from Washington State named Sylvia A. So, as always, we really want this to be interactive. Please feel free to raise your hand along the way or unmute yourself, ask questions. If you have similar experiences or things that have worked for you on this topic, we really love for you to share those either in the chat or unmuting yourself. So, we don't want this is supposed to be a learning, collaborative, and community. So, we want everyone to participate and ask questions and share information that you have. And we will moderate your questions along the way. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Shelley.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited to share with you all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as you heard, the topic for today is testing content with kinship caregivers. I'm Shelley, as you heard, I'm a senior user experience researcher at Bloom. The plan was to be joined by two co-presenters, but we just checked in real briefly with Renata Watson, the Foster Care and Kinship Licensing Initiatives Manager at Washington DCYF, and she unfortunately sent her regrets for being double booked. And we chatted really briefly with her, so we'll do our best at the end to represent what she was planning on saying. But she regrets she won't be able to be here with us. But I am so happy to be joined by Sylvia. And so Sylvia, would you like to introduce yourself really briefly now?
Hi, good morning. My name is Sylvia Alexander. I'm a kinship caregiver. I have been doing this for now 2.5 years. I'm also a social worker student at University of Washington. So this has been a really great educational moment for me.
Thank you, Sylvia. So happy to have you here, and to have you and to include your input as well on this content in this presentation. So let's get into it. We might not take the whole time up today, so I may be able to give you all some time back, but here's our plan for the time that we have. First, I'll be sharing a whole bunch about why we should test with kin. And then I'll turn to giving you a good amount of detail about how we've been doing testing with kin, so that you can get a sense of how this might be something you could incorporate into your practice potentially. And then we'll move into a Q&A session. I'll kick it off with a question for Sylvia. As I mentioned, I had a question prepared for Renata, and Renata had prepared an answer, which she briefly relayed to us a few moments ago. So we'll do our best to represent what she was planning on saying. And then we'll open it up to your questions. And those questions could be for me, for Sylvia. And so be thinking of those as they come up. Please feel free to either hold them or drop them into the chat, and we can be informal and kind of navigate preferences on asking questions along the way, or at the end. We can be flexible. All right, so first up, why should we be testing communications or content with kinship caregivers, with real kinship caregivers? In order to get into this question, I want to offer you all a short detour into my field and the philosophy that guides my work, which is human-centered design. So user testing is the industry standard in design, and in particular in a kind of design called human-centered design. You might also encounter it as HCD, an acronym. We know child welfare loves acronyms too. So the HCD name, or the human-centered name, is just really helpful because it reminds us that to be successful, a design of anything has to center the human. It has to center the user rather than centering the product, the good, the communication, or the material that we're making and designing. And this can be kind of counterintuitive because sometimes when we're in a design process, when we're engaged deeply in making something, whether it's a product or a service, our attention is so much on the product or service, and the user may not be in the room with us. The user may not be a part of the design process. And so it's kind of easy to forget them, but we should not forget them at our own peril. So products of any kind, whether they're web pages or paper information sheets, or even, more complex things like child welfare services, are really best when they meet user needs. And we can only know what user needs are by speaking to them. So we need to include them along the way. We can actually bring users into the design process across the whole life cycle of it, across a number of different opportunities in that life cycle. And on this slide, I have an image here that is a common schematic that's used to represent the design process. It's called the double diamond because it has two diamonds next to each other, and it's a representation of, over time, moving from left to right, how we go through the different phases of designing. So we start by discovery, all the way on the left, where we start with a sense of a problem area, but we're probably going to be speaking to users here to get a better sense of how that problem area shows up for them, what it's like. And the shape of the diamonds is actually important because design oscillates back and forth between a divergent process and a convergent process, times when we want to blow out information and get to know more, and times when we're actually working on refining. And so discovery is that first divergence. And then the defining stage, where we've taken what we've learned in discovery, we refine it until we're narrowing in on our goals of what do we think that the product or service that we're going to design to meet needs, to meet human user needs, are going to be. That's this convergent process. And then we get into designing, the creative ideation process, where we generate things, artifacts, interfaces, portals, service blueprints, in order to address our defined goals. Again, converging, and then the divergent process. This is where testing happens. We've prototyped what we think is going to work, but before we launch it, we want to test it so we can refine it. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, and we can see what we've overlooked, because we've always overlooked something when we've been designing separate from end users. Now, there are many examples of what we learn during testing, during the test drive portion of our products. And a lot of those examples come from industrial design, the field that designs consumer goods, like, for example, cars. So in 2015, car manufacturer Lincoln had to recall almost 14,000 cars because they were released with a very confusingly designed dashboard. There were two buttons on the dashboard that were extremely close to each other. They were right next to each other. One was the engine start-stop button, which switched the engine on or off. And the other was to put the car into sport mode. And so that's the button that drivers press when they are driving at very high speeds. I see some of you already having facial expressions that are responsive to how, yeah, that's not a great idea. We know this is a bad design in retrospect, because drivers are often reaching for the sport button right when their attention is divided, when their eyes are on the road because they're driving at high speeds. Not a good situation to have them hitting the engine stop button. And of course, that's what was happening, hence the recall. So I know we're talking about child welfare, and so this is a little bit of a different product domain, but there are still some important parallels. If nothing else, I want you to walk away from this story realizing something really important for you as you're developing new websites for your agencies, new forms for your families to be using, new interfaces, maybe licensing portals or policies or processes, whatever it is. Your product will be tested. It's just a question of when the testing is going to happen. Whether it's going to be tested before you go live and launch or after you have gone live and launched. Whether you're going to be there to observe the feedback from a small group of people before you finalize something, or if you're going to wait until the testing happens once the public at large is using it and the volume of use is very, very high. So early testing is better. There are some user experience researchers who got deeply into this and have done some research and concluded that even just testing with 5 to 10 people can surface the vast majority of problems with a product. Maybe even as high as 80% of the problems are going to be surfaced by a very small number of people testing something. So you can quite efficiently get at most issues that users are going to have when they're trying to navigate something before you go public with it and have a really high volume. So I hope I've convinced you that tested products are better products. And because, of course, in testing, we are learning from the lived experience of real users. There's no shortcut to doing that other than just bringing those people into the design process, bringing in folks who hold the experiences closest to our end users. Testing also allows us to, kind of simulate the closest thing to a real use case before we go live, which is very important. And I think something unique to child welfare is that when we test with end users, with caregivers, this is also providing an opportunity for us to kind of heal public trust, for us to signal to caregivers their input is valued. We want them to be empowered to participate and to shape this service with us. And that allows us to potentially rebuild some trust and to socialize our staff into valuing their caregivers' perspectives and the perspectives of the public that they serve. So how do we do it? Assuming we're on board with testing with Kin, the next question is how we go about this. And typically, we like to start with a problem statement. I'm going to be going into the specifics of the example of the work we're currently working on with Bloom and with Washington, for which Sylvia has been a participant in our sessions. And the problem statement for this work was that kinship caregivers need plain language information to quickly understand their new roles as caregivers. You can see, of course, that from this problem statement that this directs us to speaking to kin caregivers. So we can know, is our information sufficiently plain language? Is it helping them to quickly understand their roles as caregivers? Once we have a problem statement, this is the approach that we have taken in our work. It's one approach. There could be others, but I'm sort of outlining the steps here so you could potentially consider how to copy paste this. So there are 5 steps here, and I'll go through each of them in greater detail. But first, I recommend you start by kind of doing an inventory and setting goals. So maybe if you're, as we were, producing plain language information for web pages, to content development, to create new web pages for kinship caregivers to quickly understand their new roles, then you'll want to inventory what already exists and assessing what state is it in, what's missing, so you can set goals and prioritize how to best use your time. Then you'll need to update materials, compiling, revising, and checking things for accuracy. That's that validation stage, very important. Then, before you can test, you have to recruit real users, more on what that looks like, but you'll definitely need to devote some time to it. And that might include some selection as well to make sure that you're capturing the right kinds of experiences. And then holding sessions with users, facilitating those sessions in order to meet your goals, and compensating caregivers for their time. And then, based on everything you learn, synthesizing, updating, and publishing. Okay, as I mentioned, I'll go through each of these in turn with some added detail and some examples from our work. So first is inventorying and setting goals. As I mentioned, you'll want to explore what already exists, make any corrections if there are errors, or maybe your frontline workers have been creating a workaround for a particular piece of material. Sometimes we find that the field is already developing solutions for deeply felt problems. And so you can learn from that and kind of like bring that into the material that you're are kind of centralizing and developing. You also want to identify what content is valuable for kin. What else are they craving? So you can see how there's opportunities to include kin in this earlier stage as well to prioritize. In our project with Washington, we were able to draw on a couple of sources of input for this. The first was that we had done work with them leading a community engagement process on their new kinship-specific licensing standards. And so we had heard already from stakeholders that included kin caregivers about what was rising to the top as very confusing parts of the process. We knew we would need to have really clear information about accessing payments, since that was something that was not well understood and really necessary. And we also looked to contractors within Washington's ecosystem who were having frequent conversations with kin, who could feed us feedback that they had received about places where kin were already getting tripped up. And so we could have those help shape the goals that we were setting. And I do recommend setting narrow, achievable goals whenever possible, so that you don't expand your scope indefinitely and get stuck in this early stage. Next comes updating and checking the material. So you'll want to reproduce what exists, adapt it, or revise it. And then, of course, do two checks. One, checking for accuracy with your experts, and then doing an additional check once you know that the information is correct for plain language. That means, short and bullet point lists, simple vocabulary, using the second person pronoun you to talk directly to your readership. These are things that kind of help reduce the cognitive load for the reader so that they can get to the information they need more easily without doing difficult cognitive tasks like translating, like beneficiary or, or recipient or applicant, and just hearing this applies to me, I'm the you on the page. Tools like Hemingway Editor can be a great resource. You kind of paste in your content and it generates an output like the one that you see here, snapped on the right, that shows you, like, here are places where the sentences are more difficult to read. Here are some grammatical weakeners or places where simpler words are available. So there's a great deal that can be kind of highlighted here with tools like Hemingway Editor, and then they sort of spit out a reading level that here, for example, is grade 6 readability. So setting a goal for that and trying to reach a certain grade level of readability is a really great goal to have. Okay, so once you've got your communications or your material accurate, your content is readable, you'll want to line up some real users to test with. And first, you will have to recruit them. It's a good idea to set recruitment goals that are, that are achievable, that are realistic. As I mentioned, we can learn a lot from relatively small numbers of caregivers, and you definitely don't want or need to exhaust yourself trying to reach too many. It's better to test multiple iterations so that you don't waste time hearing the same piece of feedback multiple times, but rather bring a revised version to another round of testers and learn about some new problems. So setting some recruitment goals, and then that may also include wanting to select for specific experiences. So consider, as we did for this project, do we want to speak to caregivers who are relatively new to the process and so don't have as long of a period of time of exposure to the processes, or do you want to talk to longer term caregivers? Will you be including folks who have dual roles, maybe those who are both kinship caregivers and professionals within the child welfare ecosystem, so that they might bring multiple sources of expertise? That can be a very efficient way to get multiple perspectives on materials. It can also, potentially mean that you have a more informed and savvy population. So you want to pay attention to some of these different aspects of people's experiences. And you may also want to make sure that you have the demographics or the regional representation that you can feel confident are giving you a good sense of the spread of the target population. So in order to make those kinds of selection decisions, you'll want to ask users to submit to you some information about themselves. Here on the right, you see an interest form that we use to gather such information. And it also has really clear, short, explicit language saying, what is this project about? What will we ask you to do? And emphasizing that we'll offer compensation. That is something that we recommend you do. The industry standard is about $100 to $150 per hour for caregivers. Next, once you are ready to get into those sessions with users, you'll want to design a facilitation plan to create a loose script for what that session is going to look like. And you want that session to really meet the goals that you have for assessing the content. For us, we wanted to test the content clarity and also get a sense of the website's usability. So we brought caregivers into the session, we had them read the page, and then we asked them a combination of questions that sought to see what did they understand and retain from the information that they read, and also sent them on little tasks to go find information in the text so that they could navigate it with us and indicate how well it got across the information. And then we also set them small tasks like, where would you click on this page if you were to be trying to apply to TANF or something like that. And that gives us a sense of how they're actually using the web page. Then we also asked questions about their experiences in general. Did they get something like this? Did they try to seek it out? Did they get it from a mentor or a caseworker, or was it in a placement packet? And also some hypotheticals, like what would you have done this if you had received this? And we wanted to get a sense of what their preferences might be. Would you want this in paper? Would you want this as a link? Now, when it comes to the sessions themselves, plan out your loose script and then get ready to sort of pivot and be flexible. In our recent work, we definitely had to do that. Initially, we planned to only test over computers and tablets, and then we saw the number of caregivers that were joining on cell phones, and so we needed to shift a little bit and make sure that the content that we were testing was possible to test over cell phones, so we weren't artificially barring those caregivers who didn't have access to or didn't want to use a computer or a tablet. It was also information for us that since a lot of these caregivers were joining over cell phone, they're probably also accessing this information over cell phone. So we really needed to push hard for a format that had the ability to be responsive to screen width and be readable with cell phones. So PDFs don't really cut it in that context. And so that connects to this imperative here, like testing in a format that works for your user, and let the kin lead, like be ready to pivot a little bit. Sometimes you will have forgotten a few items in your script, and the kin will of course share things with you, so you can try to incorporate things as you go. Finally, a little note here at the bottom on testing. If you're testing something that you yourself have developed or written, this can be really hard, but we recommend that you try as much as possible to resist like defending specific content choices or design choices that you've made, and also resisting answering questions. And this can feel a little bit awkward in the sessions. It can feel like a bit of linguistic jujitsu that you need to do, where a caregiver might say to you, like, does this mean that something? And they'll give you their understanding, and they're asking it to you as a question to verify if they've understood it correctly. But you should resist saying, no, that is not correct, or yes, that is correct, and answer their question with a question and say, is that the sense you're getting? Like, tell me more. And so that way you make more space for them to share their thinking and to share their reactions and to see places where the content is breaking down places where there's ambiguity, places where it's misleading, rather than answering their question. And then that means that your correct interpretation takes precedence over an opportunity to open up potential places of ambiguity in the text. Okay. Finally, you have tested with real caregivers. You'll want to sort of analyze those sessions, keep track of the suggestions that are arising as maybe they're directly from kin making suggestions, or you're seeing ways to address their confusions, and then make edits to your content and publish. Now, a couple of other things. Don't forget to report back out to your participants. We've heard in the past that caregivers are often asked to provide feedback, but almost never hear back after having provided that feedback. And that can feel a bit demoralizing. It can feel like I put something out, but it just went into the ether. And so we really try to circle back with caregivers, summarize what we heard from them and from others, tell them, we heard you. We want to make sure that this is right. Let us know if we overlooked something important. And here's what we're hoping, comes out of this. Share the actual link if you can, or if you can't, sort of give an update for where this work is going, which can feel really empowering. So another note here at the bottom, this work is never done. Testing is and if it leads to publishing is great, but it's never the final period on a sentence of including kin. We hope that since with every new generation and new policy change, things are changing. It's important that including kin and testing with them become a continuous part of your work. So there's more to do. All right. That was a whole lot of me chatting. Happy to field any questions about that. But I'll open it up first to Sylvia to kick us off. So Sylvia participated in a couple sessions that we ran while testing Washington, new versions of Washington's content in web form. And so Sylvia, over to you for how it felt to participate, or anything you want to share about being a kin caregiver in this process.
Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. And you brought up a really good point about building trust between caregivers and the system. This is not an easy thing to navigate at several levels, but just having the opportunity to give your input and feeling that you're being heard, especially coming from those that do not have any experiences with technology or the system itself. Like some of us are thrown into this without absolutely any idea of how it works, right? And we learn to swim and navigate on our own. So I have learned a lot more from participating in this program than I did the previous 2 years being a caregiver. So sorry, I have to multitask. This is our playtime, so I have to make sure that he's included. I want to say hi.
Hi, sweetie.
Say hello. So it's our morning playtime. He'll not let me have it time for myself, so which is fine. But anyway, I really appreciated the opportunity to be here, and I hope they continue to extend it to to all of us. Like I said before, the number of more mature kinship caregivers is growing, and we need to be, on the know and know how to navigate the system and whatnot. And so having systems that are designed with that in mind, that not all of us are going to have the latest computer or going to be computer savvy or phone savvy for that matter, helps a lot. And it also helps in terms of, if we are well educated on this, we can help our social workers as well, right? Because there are a lot of things we'll be able to do on our own, and to sort of like not make the caseload heavier than it needs to be. So I think any foster that good communication and relationship between caregivers and the Department of Children Welfare.
I love that point. I think that's so important, that the web content or the communications in whatever form out there, it does set the tone in some ways for the rest of the communications that you're also having with caseworkers. And it's definitely a tension we saw in this project, continue to see, like so much of the language we'll say like, we'll speak to your caseworker about this and speak to your caseworker about that. And what we want to do is make sure that we're equipping kin caregivers with as much information in the event that the caseworker is overloaded, so that we can try to relieve some of that pressure and empower them to, empower you to sort of advocate for yourselves and help move things along.
Yeah, this definitely gives us the tool to advocate for ourselves a little bit better, because we feel like we know what we're doing. A lot of times I felt coming into this, I felt completely illiterate, and lost, right? I felt stupid sometimes for asking questions that, well, they were right there in plain sight if I would have looked it up. But no, this definitely empowers us a lot more to help ourselves and to help the system, which is good for the children in the long run.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. So as I mentioned, Renata was not able to join us, but we did chat with her. But the planned question was, what surprised you in the feedback that the Bloom team reported out to you? And as we had revised materials that we tested, and she said, I took a few notes, and Sylvia, you'll correct me if there's anything I missed, but she said that many things surprised her, but that one thing that stood out was that even though she knew how technical the agency's language typically is, she thought she had done a lot of work, and indeed she had done a lot of work to already simplify a lot of the language in the initial materials that we worked with, that we revised and then prototyped and tested and revised again. And so she thought she was handing off language that was sort of like in a good place, ready to go, already simplified. But then seeing what came back from our team and seeing that what she had thought was in plain talk was absolutely not, just reminded her how the team at DCYF is so surrounded by the lingo all the time that it's really hard to take that professional hat off and sort of to see the places where an outsider or a newcomer might not know all of the technical language. So yeah, a good reminder to us that it's really important to have an appreciation for the experiences we bring into the space and the experiences that we can't take off when we come into the space, right? That we're bringing along with us. Sometimes that's professional expertise as well. So I'll actually stop sharing, and I would love if folks have questions, please, raise your hand or just come off mute, or write your questions in the chat. Happy to field questions as they arise.
Sorry, my dog got in the way now. No, I think this went great. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. You guys are doing a great job. So we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. I see one question in the chat. Okay, Kylie, you mentioned testing with different group of caregivers each round. Do caregivers have an opportunity to provide additional feedback after seeing the revisions? Yeah, great question. We actually we extended the opportunity for caregiver participants to participate multiple times on different pieces of content. So that was one decision that we had made, and I can see arguments for it different ways depending on the specific thing being developed. But in our case, they were different web pages every time. And we do report back to caregivers with like a summary of what we heard and what we recommended, but we haven't actually done that quite yet. But we don't plan to send them the revision yet because it's not yet live. If it were live, I think we would send it to them. And then we would say like, let us know if anything else comes up. But for now, since it's not live, there's not really an opportunity for them to give additional feedback, but we hope that in the future if this can be more deeply integrated into the content development process and updates for the website and DCYF, there can be more of a practice of capturing feedback and having that feed into successive rounds of revisions. Yeah. And thank you for the question.
I was just wondering if anyone else here on on the learning community has done something like this or some variation thereof, and if they want to share a little bit about that too.
Yeah, would love to hear that. And it doesn't have to be testing, of course, like any way in which kin are being involved in, making decision making. Maybe they're, consulted or involved in the decision making. Would love to hear about that.
Shelley, are all of these caregivers licensed?
For this particular round, we selected for licensed caregivers,
Okay,
yes, since this work flowed out of the new licensing standards.
okay, okay. I'm sorry, I might have missed that.
Yeah, so, oh no, that's okay. I don't think I clarified that very well. So for this particular round, we did specifically select folks who were licensed. We really wanted to make sure that we were capturing input from people who had gone through this process. I think in
Mhm.
other rounds we have included unlicensed. Yeah, in some rounds we have included unlicensed folks because we also want to get for an uninitiated reader. So it actually depends which material. Sorry, I'm confusing you, but
No, that's
for some materials we're interested for the licensing checklist materials, we were interested in somebody who has not been through this process. What questions do you have? And then for payment specific material, we were like, for somebody who has been through this process, does this help you understand how you do that? And
mhm.
so, yeah, we've selected different groups for different materials, depending on what we think will be the most informative. Mhm. Question, do you have advice for recruiting caregivers to test material, particularly if it's for a broader audience rather than targeted group? Um, Lots of advice for recruiting. Recruitment is tough for sure, but it rests on relationships. So the better your relationships are with folks who are having day-to-day interactions, and the better their relationships are, the more there is a sort of a possibility for warm handoffs and trusted handoffs. Um, I'm a little unsure about the latter half of your question, particularly if it's for a broader audience. Do you mean that the recruitment is a broader audience or that the material is for a broader audience? I'm going to assume it's that the recruitment is for a broader audience. Um, yeah, we found that the best way to get to folks is through the relationships that they have. So if you are designing a recruitment strategy, you'll want to think about like what characterizes the people that you're trying to capture, like what are their um, profiles, networks, experiences, and like as a result of that, like what are the places and people that are common to those people to those individuals that you're trying to recruit. So like where will you find them and what relationships do they have that you might be able to sort of like get introduced to. So maybe it's sort of like community organizations or social service provision organizations or something like that if it's not directly through your agency. So yeah, it's tricky, but there are some rules of thumb. Thanks for that question. Any other questions at all?
I actually do have a question for Sylvia, I guess, is have you been asked to comment on like the approach that's being used as opposed to just the assignment at hand?
I'm sorry, he just threw some. Can you
Oh,
repeat
that's
your
okay.
question?
Have you been asked to help with giving feedback about the approach that was being used to collect the feedback?
Um, I don't actually. Yes, sorry. There's I got so much going on this morning. Um, you meaning like how they reach out to us and ask if we want to participate?
Or like, yeah, the whole approach, how they recruit, um, how the process is of gathering the feedback. Or maybe I'll direct the question to Shelley.
Yeah, that would be better. I mean, we have talked about so many different things, to be honest with you. And um, in my mind right now, I'm thinking all the websites that we talked about, not
Hmm.
specific on how they approached, caregivers.
It's true that it's not, I think it's fair. It's not something that we've brought up to the caregivers we've engaged, like Sylvia. We're fairly open, like I mentioned in the in my remarks about how you loosely script what the session is going to focus on. We really try to keep our questions fairly narrowly oriented towards the goals we're trying to accomplish. But we do offer a few different places for caregivers just to tell their story if they'd like to. And is there anything else you want to share? We let caregivers lead if they say, like, what I really want is this other thing entirely. We won't stop folks from giving us additional feedback. But it's true that we don't spend a lot of time summarizing exactly the nuts and bolts of our approach. And that's a good thing for us to sort of consider. Like maybe we should also. I think a thing that I would love to do, and this is, a broader scope, a thing that I would like to do is have deeper relationships with an ongoing group of kin caregivers in a more of a sort of advisory board capacity. And to some extent, we do have conversations like that with Washington has a kinship caregiver oversight committee that we present to periodically, and we attend. Whether it's presenting what we are up to or asking for feedback or asking for assistance in recruitment, because those folks hold a lot of really deep relationships among the caregiver community. And so it's presentations in those spaces where we're more likely to sort of like give a window into our process and ask for feedback about that. In the narrower sessions where we're bringing folks in and saying like, okay, here's the web page, take the time to read it, and then we'll ask you questions. We don't share so much about our approach. Thank you for the
Okay,
question.
thanks.
Mhm.
Thank you. Hey, Shelley, doesn't look like there's any other questions or comments.
Great. Thank you
So,
so much for the time. This was lovely. Thanks again to
yeah,
Lisa and Marina and everybody for making this happen. And Sylvia for being here.
thank you so much. Thank you, Sylvie and Shelley. I just want to let you know our next session is going to be in 2 weeks from now. So it's going to be on February 13th, and the topic's going to be on dedicating kin finding responsibilities. So same time, same channel. And thank you all for joining us today. And thanks again, Shelley and Sylvia. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everybody.